We had the ceasefire yesterday, late last night, and today what we've learned that this sort of attacks are again and again. Israel has attacked Lebanon,
Uh-huh.
and more than 100 attacks. We had some sort of attacks in Iran, some sort of bombing. Iran bombing, UAE together with Kuwait, and it seems that ceasefire is somehow shaking. And but after all, what we've learned from the secretary of, the press secretary, White House, Caroline Levitt, she just said that they're gonna meet on Saturday. JD Vance together with Steve Witkoff and Kushner, they're gonna meet with the Iranian counterparts. They're gonna talk about the ceasefire, 2 week ceasefire. So far, the ceasefire is shaking, but the main issue of what is going on, why did the United States decide to go after some sort of ceasefire, is basically related to the reality of war, reality of battlefield. But we know Iran has something important right now in its hands that it hadn't it before. It's the Strait of Hormuz. They call it a nuclear bomb for Iran. And what is your understanding, and what is the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, and how do you find the current situation with the war?
Well, the Strait of Hormuz controls the OPEC oil trade, and it's only part of the picture. It's not going to matter so much if the fighting, if Donald Trump had succeeded in his threats to blow up every bridge in Iran and every power plant that would take a century to replace. If that would have happened, then Iran would have wiped out all of the oil export capacity of all of the Arab OPEC countries, from Saudi Arabia to the Emirates. And that wouldn't have left any oil to export at all. But I don't think that even if there are violations of ceasefire, and Israel is going to do everything it can to break the agreement, it's going to continue to attack. And the idea of making a ceasefire with the United States is just as absurd as the thought of Russia making a ceasefire with Ukraine and letting Britain and France and Germany continue to send missiles and Estonia at Russia, because you have to have all the parties involved. And Israel's already said, we're not a part of this. We're going to keep shooting. Well, I think that probably the Iranians are only going to retaliate against Israel for this. They're going to try to do what they can to provide arms to their cohorts in fighting Lebanon, arms to Hezbollah and others. But I don't think there will be any major total attack such as Trump has been threatening for at least a 2-week interim. And that 2 weeks gives the whole rest of the world an opportunity to create an alternative to what, if the fighting resumes, would be a world depression on the scale of the 1930s. And this depression would be a result of stopping 20% of the oil trade, and I think 30% to 40% of the gas trade, and much of the fertilizer trade, and ammonia and sulfur that's needed. All of that would require huge close down of industries, and the whole world would be threatened by chaos. Well, threatening chaos has been the U.S. strategy all this time, and all of a sudden, the threat of chaos is a tool to force other countries to follow a policy to avoid it is in the hands of Iran. And it's through its control of Hormuz and the means of exporting the OPEC oil and gas that remain in production right now, such as remains. And so the question is, what are other countries going to do to support Iran in bringing pressure on the United States and on Israel to prevent the resumption of hostilities that would result in their chronic depression that would last for 3 or 4 years and lead to a whole restructuring of the world's economic and financial system. So I want to get into what that restructuring would look like, but I'd like to talk about the general strategy, because 50 years ago, what's happening today, there was a general logic for it that was all spelled out. And it was spelled out at where I happened to be working at the Hudson Institute. And that strategy that Iran is following is very much akin to what was discussed as a means of avoiding world chaos in the 1960s, and that was atomic warfare. And the question was, how can the world avoid the chaos of being blown up? And the answer was the doctrine of mutual destruction, MAD, mutual assured destruction, MAD. And the idea was that if only one country had the atom bomb, as the United States had in 1945, then it could threaten other countries with atomic war. But what are you going to do when Soviet Russia developed the atom bomb and then other countries began developing atom bomb? The threat of atomic war was the single major concern in foreign policy in the 1960s. And Don Brennan at the Hudson Institute coined the term mutual assured destruction. And Herman Kahn in 1962, the same year, wrote a book thinking about the unthinkable, spelling it out. And the idea was that, if you have other countries not only have the atom bomb, but they maintain military parity with the ability to improve their weapons technology in keeping with each other, then every major country will be afraid to use the atom bomb because their opponents can fight back and use it against them, and they'll both be blown up. So that as long as there was parity among the atom bomb users, war among them was avoided. And the United States, of course, continued to fight its own wars everywhere from Southeast Asia to Latin America and Africa. But this wasn't the World War, and it wasn't an atomic war. And the whole idea was the use of the understanding of countries that if they escalated a kind of warfare, that their own existence would be threatened beyond their economies. Well, that's the situation that we're in today. What was threatened in the 1960s was called atomic winter. In other words, if there was an atomic war, the whole world would essentially have a winter. Production would end, agriculture would end, trade would end. Well, what is threatened today is a financial winter. And the financial winter would be suffered by the oil importing countries from Europe to Japan and Korea in the Far East and most of the global South and many of the Asian countries. So the question is, how can this financial winter be avoided? Well, what makes the situation between Iran and the United States different from the military situation between the United States and Russia in the 1960s is that Iran cannot say, well, if we blow up the oil producing capacity of the Arab OPEC countries, that's going to leave the oil importing countries in desperate positions. And the United States had already thought out what the result would be. And Donald Trump bragged, saying that, well, sure, Iran may very well do all of this. And Iran has demonstrated its power militarily to at least wipe out its neighboring economies' ability to produce oil. But Donald Trump said, well, America is an oil surplus country and a gas exporting country, thanks to all of the fracking technology that's been developed. And if the blowing up of the OPEC oil trade raised world oil prices, that would be a bonanza for the American oil and gas companies. And while the United States began to release its reserves of oil to keep down prices here, the oil companies would export their oil and gas at the enormously high world prices to Western Europe and Japan and Asia, and essentially give itself power over its closest allies. So it's it's up to these allies to decide, well, we cannot afford a fight between the United States and Iran, which would destroy our economy. You may talk later with me about how it would also destroy the U.S. economy financially, but for the time being, the most immediate crisis would be in countries that need their oil to power their factories and heat and light their homes and office buildings and produce fertilizer and power their railroads and transportation and all of that. Well, making that threat of destroying other countries' access to oil has been the center of U.S. Foreign policy for the last half century, as you and I have discussed in earlier broadcasts. And now that threat is in the power of Iran. And the question is, will other countries, will Western Europe and East Asia realize that it's up to them to stop this war? Because if there is another attack on Iran, and Iran has already demonstrated its ability to wipe out OPEC oil and gas, just as it's already wiped out Qatar's helium export capacity, the result will be the global financial winter. What'll they do? Well, I guess yesterday at the United Nations, the vote sponsored by the Arab Emirates to blame Iran for being attacked by having the power to retaliate to the Israeli and American attack by fighting back, that was an aggression. It's aggression to fight back against being attacked with the threat of being wiped out. If you defend yourself militarily, you're to be blamed. Well, China, I think, helped bring sanity into the discussion by blocking that action from being passed by the Security Council and voted on in the United States. But it shows how totally almost insane the U.S. opposition to the whole rest of the world is. The United States and Iran jointly are threatening the entire world with utter chaos if there's a war. What are the other countries going to do? Well, so far, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, other countries have said, well, why is Iran bombing us? We didn't bomb it. Well, Iran's response is, well, you're letting the American bases there. You're letting the American planes fly over your territory. You're not doing anything about it. Well, Europe has also said, well, we're not joining. Why are you making us suffer? We didn't join the war. Look at Italy and Spain and other countries have blocked even France have blocked the United States from using its airfields and military bases there for planes to take off and bomb you. Why are you blaming us? Well, what's to be blamed is their passivity, their inactivity, their refusal to do anything at all to stop the American attack on Iran, which is an attack basically on all of the rules of civilization, as we've discussed before, the rules of international law, the rules of war against not bombing civilians, the rules against not bombing basic infrastructure utilities. And in the last few days, the assassination of professors and the destruction, physical destruction of universities to do what Israel said: we must destroy the culture. God has commanded us to treat Iran like Amalek. They are our existential enemy. Where are other countries moving to accuse Donald Trump and Hegseth of being war criminals and bringing charges against them to prevent them and the rest of their staff from traveling? There's been it's as if the whole rest of the world is paralyzed and unable to really cope. And it's very hard to see whether it realizes this. For the last week, I'm just amazed that the stock markets in the United States, Europe, and even Asia have hardly gone down at all with this threat of world depression. Only, maybe 1% at most, just marginally up and down, hardly anything. And even more surprising than has been the fact that today, despite the fact that none of this danger of national war was discounted, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was soared over 1,000 points. Stock markets in Japan and Korea, the most vulnerable to a cutback of oil and gas, recovered by 3, 4, 5%. I mean, just amazing gains, not from any depression that had gone down, but as if somehow everything is going to be okay. The question I guess all of us have to forecast and ask is the world just in a state of denial? It cannot think about the unthinkable prospect that the war will really result in mutual destruction, assured destruction between Iran and the oil importing countries to what the United States hope will be its own benefit to pick up all the marbles. How can they proceed without realizing this?
Yeah. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the main questions right now would be what would be the future for GCC countries? Talking about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, all these countries. But looking at what's going on, can they survive this situation of hostility against Iran? And there's somehow they want to fight Iran. Today we've seen UAE is trying to strike some targets in Iran. This is the future that they're seeking for, but can they survive the situation that they're making for themselves?
No, I don't think they can survive. They were these sheikdoms, these basically little family sheikdoms, were created right after World War II, with Kuwait a bit later, with the intent of dividing and conquering all of the Arab countries, and most of them they're small family dictatorships with I think 88% of the Emirates and of Bahrain consist of immigrant labor that's working there. Saudi Arabia is really the only Arab country in OPEC, I guess along with Qatar, that have a fairly large domestic native-born Saudi and Qatari population. The others are like Jordan, are populated largely by Palestinians and then increasingly by Indian immigrants under almost near feudal slave terms. The immigrants have their passports taken away. There's no courts for them. They're regularly abused. These are countries that are backward, and essentially they are a legacy of the whole epoch of Western colonialism from the Middle East to Africa to to Asia, and they really don't. Not only should they be replaced, but Iran makes the following point: even if you get rid of American military bases, as we've insisted, the problem is that your economies are inextricably in a symbiotic relationship with the United States. For instance, American artificial intelligence companies, computer companies, Google and Amazon and others have all built huge data processing plants in the Bahrain, the Emirates, and other countries in order to have access to energy, especially because it's going to be very, very hard for these companies to get energy in the United States, given the inability of the United States to create electric utilities in enough of a hurry to enable them to proceed with the data processing that they're going to need in order for the Magnificent Seven stocks, all of the information and technology and internet stocks and computer chip stocks from soaring. None of this can take place without having some source of energy, probably outside the United States. And of course, that energy outside the United States is just exactly what's threatened. And that's why Iran has concentrated on bombing the American affiliates in these other Arab OPEC countries, because it says that what is needed in order to protect Iran's own national security is to remove the symbiotic economic relationships between the OPEC countries, from Saudi Arabia right down through the smaller Emirates and little family dictatorships. And I don't see how that can be done without some sort of takeover. Iran used to control the straits, and Oman was right across the Strait of Hormuz, where it sit at the Titus, was part of Iran until the 17th century. The British East India Company seized Oman and broke it away because it wanted to control the seaborne trade on the way to India, which was the key to British prosperity there. And Iran wants to reverse this legacy of colonialism, and it wants to prevent financial and economic colonialism that has made the other OPEC states basically Western, and that is why these countries have joined the United States in attacking Iran and trying to push forth the United Nations resolution blaming Iran for the war for defending itself. So even if the immediate war with the United States is settled, that's going to lead to, I think, what looks like an Iranian conquest of the rest of the countries on the oil Gulf. And there will be either some sort of a rapprochement, an agreement. Saudi Arabia has tried to reach a modicum of an agreement with Iran, but its own national savings funds and the funds of its wealthiest families are all invested in the United States, largely in the information technology companies that have been investing in their own OPEC countries for what I've described, the data processing plants, and also just because they thought that by investing in the United States, that was supposed to provide them with military protection. Well, what Iran has shown is that all of this is a fiction. The whole idea that Israel protected itself with the Iron Dome is lost. The idea that the United States is protecting the Arab OPEC countries from attack or takeover or any threat to their way of doing things has been blown up. The United States is not the protector. It's the United States and its attempt to control the world's oil trade. Now that it's seized the oil of Venezuela, now that it's been able to isolate Russia's oil trade, to gain control of the ability by itself to create chaos in other countries that would be subject to U.S. sanctions against oil if the United States so desired. Well, you've seen how what the basic dynamic is. What the United States has done by its attack on Iran has led Iran to respond, and essentially it is now in the very position that the United States had hoped to be in. The United States policy has been so self-defeating that it's brought about the exact opposite of its intended effect. That's the effect of underestimating the fact that if you try to take over other countries, they'll fight back. And other countries are not stupid, and they don't have a corrupt private sector military industrial complex that makes weapons that don't work. Their government is actually, like that of Russia and that of China, have created weapons that do work. And that's left the United States at least a decade behind in missile technology, air technology, and the other military technology that it takes. The United States was completely unprepared to really wage a war in Iran, but the neocons around Trump, who have financed his political campaign and supported his appointment of a political cabinet that essentially are personally loyal to Trump without questioning him, they have cut themselves off from any kind of realistic feedback to make a realistic estimation of what will the effects of this war will be. They've left out of account all of the trade dynamics, the financial dynamics, the military dynamics at work. There's been a tunnel vision in U.S. policy, and you can now look at the genius of the Iranian strategists to look at the big picture and see what they have to do to defend themselves. And there's no way that they can attack the United States in the way that they've been able to attack Israel or the Arab OPEC countries, but they can stop the oil trade, and again, by controlling the Strait of Hormuz largely, or by simply wiping out, bombing the oil and gas production of the OPEC countries. They can do that to hold over the heads of the rest of the world, to show that you had better bring pressure on the United States and isolate it from attacking us, because if we're going to be destroyed, our only defense is to destroy the OPEC economies, and that will destroy your economies as well. So an attack on us will be an attack on your economies, causing a depression, an economic collapse there, financial collapse, unemployment, and all of the things that happen in a Great Depression or financial winter.